cold steel of a customized Colt 1911 pressed flat against the mahogany desk. But Celeste's eyes were locked on the man who had put it there. Declan Gallagher, the most ruthless syndicate leader in Chicago, stared at her, trembling. Swollen silhouette. "Tell me who the father is," the Mafia boss demanded. His voice was a lethal, vibrating whisper that seemed to suck the oxygen from the room. She had hidden the truth for 6 agonizing months. But time had just run out. Celeste Higgins had spent her entire 32 years mastering the art of invisibility. It was a survival mechanism, one largely afforded to her by her physical size, in a world that worshipped sharp angles, hollowed cheeks, and women who looked as though they might snap in a stiff breeze. Celeste was undeniably and unapologetically fat. She had broad, soft shoulders, thick thighs, and a heavy, rounded stomach that she typically draped in oversized cashmere cardigans and loose empire waist dresses. Society had a habit of looking right through women her size, treating them as part of the background scenery. For most of her life, Celeste had resented that invisibility. For the last 6 months, however, it had been her greatest weapon. She worked as the senior forensic accountant for Gallagher Logistics, a towering glass and steel corporation situated in the wealthy enclave of Chicago's River North. On paper, it was a legitimate import-export empire. In reality, it was the meticulously clean front for the Gallagher crime syndicate. Celeste knew exactly who she worked for. She saw the millions of dollars moving through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the sudden spikes in revenue that coincided with shipments at the Port of Chicago, and the consulting fees paid to ghost entities. But Celeste kept her head down, her practical leather clocks silent on the marble floors and her mouth strictly shut. Her invisibility had worked flawlessly until the night of the winter gala at the Drake Hotel. It was supposed to be a standard corporate obligation. Celeste had worn a deep burgundy velvet gown, one of the few garments she owned that hugged her full figure instead of obscuring it, and had found a quiet corner in the Gold Coast room where she could sip her ginger ale. She had not intended to cross paths with Declan Gallagher. Declan was a phantom to most of his employees, a terrifying specter of a man who ruled his empire with cold, calculated brutality. He was tall and built like a heavyweight boxer, with piercing, pale blue eyes and a jaw that looked carved from granite. He was normally surrounded by towering bodyguards and women poured into 6-inch Christian Louboutins. But that night, Declan had been bleeding. Celeste had retreated to the darkened archival library on the 2nd floor to escape the noise, only to find the Mafia boss slumped against a leather Chesterfield sofa, gripping his ribs while blood seeped through his tailored Tom Ford tuxedo. A rival faction had attempted a quiet hit in the valet tunnel. His security team had neutralized the threat, but not before a stray blade caught him. Instead of screaming, Celeste locked the heavy oak doors. She did not panic. Using a first aid kit from the catering kitchen and a strip torn from her velvet slip, she cleaned and bound the wound with the clinical precision of a woman who had spent her life quietly fixing other people's messes. Declan watched her the entire time. He did not see a fat, invisible accountant through the haze of pain and adrenaline. He saw a fiercely competent, deeply grounded woman when her soft, warm hands pressed the bandages to his torso. Something volatile ignited between them. The isolation of the room, the scent of her vanilla perfume, and the stark contrast between his violent world and her calm, nurturing presence broke down his defenses, to Celeste's eternal shock. It broke down hers as well. What happened on that leather sofa was desperate, raw, and earth-shattering. Declan touched her with a reverence she had never experienced. His large hands mapped the heavy curves of her hips and the soft expanse of her belly, as though she were the most exquisite treasure he had ever claimed. For one night, Celeste was not invisible. She was the center of a dangerous man's universe. But when dawn broke over Lake Michigan, reality crashed back down. Declan's security team breached the library and swept him away to a private underground clinic. Celeste smoothed her ruined dress, walked into the freezing Chicago morning, and convinced herself it had been a fever dream. Declan was a king of the underworld. She was a plus-size bookkeeper with a fondness for Excel spreadsheets. They were an anomaly, a mistake. 2 months later, the nausea began. Celeste sat on the cold tile of her cramped bathroom in Logan Square, staring at 2 pink lines on a plastic stick while her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She was pregnant with the heir to the Gallagher syndicate. Panic set in instantly. Celeste knew what happened to women who became entangled with the mob. They became leverage. They became targets. More terrifyingly, she knew what Declan might do if he found out. A man like him would never allow his bloodline to walk away. He might take the child and leave Celeste trapped in a gilded cage for the rest of her life. Or worse, he might decide she was an unsuitable mother and discard her entirely. So she hid the pregnancy. Her body type worked perfectly for the deception. As the baby grew, Celeste simply bought larger cardigans. When her face became a little fuller, her co-workers assumed she was gaining weight, a subject no one dared mention to a fat woman out of sheer social awkwardness. She blamed her morning sickness on a lingering stomach ulcer. She scheduled appointments at Northwestern Memorial Hospital under a false surname and paid in cash from savings she had meticulously accumulated. She thought she was safe. She thought she could quietly transfer to the Seattle branch before her 3rd trimester and disappear into the rain. She had not counted on the karma of the Gallagher organization coming back to bite her. And she certainly had not counted on Ryan Mitchell. By the 6th month, the physical toll of the pregnancy was becoming impossible to ignore. Celeste's ankles swelled fiercely by mid-afternoon, the severe edema making her sensible shoes feel like clamps. The baby, a boy, according to the cheerful ultrasound technician, was extraordinarily active and constantly kicked against her ribs. Her lower back ached with persistent, grinding pain. The heavy wool coats she wore to obscure her growing middle in the warming spring weather made her dizzy with heat. Celeste was exhausted and operating on a knife's edge of anxiety. She was fast-tracking her transfer, quietly packing her apartment and finalizing the second quarter audits when she found discrepancies in Ryan's accounts. Ryan Mitchell was a mid-level manager who controlled logistics for the Gallagher organization's Southside distribution hubs. He was a slick, overly cologned man who wore suits that were slightly too shiny and smiled with too many teeth. He had always treated Celeste with thinly veiled disgust, making passive-aggressive comments about her diet or sighing loudly whenever he had to squeeze past her in the break room. Celeste had never liked him, but as she ran the numbers on the May shipments, her dislike crystallized into cold professional dread. Ryan was skimming. He had inflated the cost of shipping containers and pocketed the difference. Nearly $200,000 over 4 months in the Gallagher organization. Stealing from Declan was not a fireable offense. It was a fatal one. Celeste compiled the evidence on a secure flash drive, intending to place it anonymously in the compliance lockbox. She wanted no part in the violent retribution that would undoubtedly follow before she could make the drop. However, her body betrayed her. It happened on a Tuesday. Celeste had been experiencing round ligament pain so sharp that it brought tears to her eyes. She left the office early and took a cab directly to the maternity ward at Northwestern. She did not notice the black Mercedes following her. Ryan had been paranoid for weeks because the auditors were crawling through his quarterly reports. He had been looking for leverage. Any dirt he could use to blackmail someone on the accounting team into looking the other way. When he saw Celeste, the straight-laced and seemingly boring senior accountant, sneaking into the obstetrics wing, he believed he had struck gold. The next morning, Ryan cornered her in the basement archives of the Gallagher building. The air was stale and smelled of ozone and old paper. Well, Celeste Higgins. Ryan purred as he stepped from behind a row of filing cabinets. He blocked her path to the elevator, his eyes dropping to her heavily draped torso. "You've been keeping secrets." Celeste stiffened and clutched a stack of ledgers against her chest. Her heart began a frantic, terrified drumbeat. "Move out of my way." "Ryan, I saw you yesterday," he said, taking another step toward her. His predatory gaze gleamed with malicious triumph. "The maternity ward. Under the name Celeste Hughes. You're pregnant. Who's the unlucky guy? Does he know his kid is being carried by the office whale?" Celeste's face burned with humiliation and panic, but she forced her expression to remain stoic. "My personal life is none of your business. Let me pass. It becomes my business when I need a favor." Ryan sneered, dropping the false pleasantry from his voice. He tapped one manicured finger against the files in her arms. "I know you're looking at the South Side accounts. I need you to adjust the margins. Make the discrepancies vanish." "You want me to cover up your theft?" Celeste asked, her voice trembling, despite her efforts to control it. "Declan will kill you if he finds out." "Declan won't find out unless you tell him," Ryan hissed, leaning close enough for Celeste to smell stale coffee and mints on his breath. "If you don't fix those books by Friday, I'm going straight to human resources. Actually, no, I'll go directly to the gossip mill. How long do you think you'll keep your job once everyone knows you're an unwed? Pregnant liability. They'll find an excuse to fire you. Good luck paying for that bastard child without Gallagher health insurance." Ryan believed he was being clever. He thought Celeste was only a pathetic, lonely woman, hiding a shameful secret from a random one-night stand. He had absolutely no idea that the baby he was threatening belonged to the apex predator of their world. "Friday. Celeste," Ryan whispered as he stepped aside. "Or the whole building knows." Celeste practically ran to the elevator, her breaths coming in short. Panicked gasps. The baby kicked violently in response to her surging adrenaline. If Ryan exposed her pregnancy, the scrutiny surrounding her would multiply 100-fold. People would begin doing the math. They would start looking more closely. Worse, if Declan's inner circle discovered that Ryan was blackmailing an employee, Declan would intervene personally. Declan was already back in Chicago. He had returned from a brutal 3-month turf war in Palermo, looking leaner, darker, and more dangerous than ever. From the moment his private jet touched down at O'Hare, he had been looking for Celeste. She felt his eyes on her in the lobby and saw his imposing silhouette lingering behind the glass walls of the accounting department. Declan had not forgotten the night at the Drake. If anything, the memory of her soft skin and quiet strength had haunted him across the Atlantic. He had tried to dismiss it and bury it beneath the violence of his daily life. But it had proved impossible. He wanted her back in his bed. He wanted to strip away the oversized sweaters and possess the woman beneath them. He did not know she was carrying his child. But his lethal instincts were already sounding an alarm. He noticed how she avoided his gaze. He noticed the slight waddle in her normally brisk walk and the pale, exhausted sheen of her skin. The tension became a tightly wound spring, drawing tighter. With every passing hour, Celeste was trapped between a blackmailer who wanted her to commit professional suicide and a Mafia boss whose obsession with her was breaking through his iron control. By Thursday afternoon, the walls had completely closed around her. Celeste tried to bury Ryan's missing funds in a dummy account to buy more time. But her hands shook so badly that she nearly locked herself out of the mainframe. Her stress level was dangerously high. Her blood pressure spiked, producing a dull, throbbing headache behind her eyes. She needed to leave. She had booked a one-way flight to Seattle for that night. Her bags were already in the trunk of her Honda Civic, parked on the lowest level of the Gallagher building's underground garage. She only had to make it to 5 o'clock. At 4:45, the accounting floor was nearly empty. Celeste grabbed her heavy wool coat, draped it over her swollen stomach, and headed toward the service elevator. She was panting slightly, the weight of the baby pressing against her lungs. She made it to sub-level 3. The garage was dimly lit and echoed with the distant hum of ventilation fans. She fumbled for her keys, her swollen fingers slipping against the metal. Going somewhere. Celeste. She spun around, her heart dropping into her stomach. Ryan Mitchell stepped out from behind a concrete pillar. He looked frantic, his tie loosened, and a sheen of sweat covering his forehead. "It's Thursday." "Ryan, you said Friday," Celeste said, backing away until her spine touched the cold metal of her car door. "The internal audit team just pulled the Southside manifests." Ryan snapped as he closed the distance between them. "You didn't fix the books. They're going to see the missing funds." "I couldn't," Celeste cried, crossing her arms protectively over her abdomen. "The system is double encrypted. If I alter the main ledger, it flags Declan directly. I would be signing my own death warrant." "You stupid fat cow," Ryan snarled, his panic turning into vicious rage. He lunged, grabbed Celeste by the shoulders, and slammed her against the car. Celeste screamed, a raw and primal sound of terror. She did not care about the pain in her shoulders. She cared only about the impact near her stomach. "Let go of me. You're going to march back upstairs and fix it right now, or I swear to God I'll beat the living." Ryan's threat ended with a sickening crunch. His weight was ripped away from her. Celeste slumped against the car, clutching her stomach and gasping for air. Standing over Ryan's crumpled, groaning body was Tommy, Declan Gallagher's 6'4" head of security. Tommy's knuckles were bleeding, but his face remained a mask of terrifying indifference. He did not even look down at Ryan, his eyes fixed on Celeste. "Mr. Gallagher wants to see you in the penthouse. Now, I need to go home," Celeste stammered, tears of shock blurring her vision. "Please, Tommy, I'm not feeling well." Tommy's eyes briefly moved to her stomach before returning to her face. "It wasn't a request. Miss Higgins, come with me." There was no escape. The hard karma Ryan had invited had arrived instantly. But Celeste was caught inside the blast radius, trembling uncontrollably. She allowed Tommy to escort her to the private executive elevator. The ride to the 60th floor felt like a descent into hell. Every floor they passed seemed like another nail in her coffin. The elevator doors opened directly into Declan's penthouse office, a massive and intimidating space of dark wood, leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. Declan stood near the glass, pouring amber whiskey into a tumbler. He did not turn when Celeste entered. Tommy silently closed the doors behind her, leaving them alone. The silence stretched, suffocating and heavy. Celeste remained near the entrance, clutching her thick wool coat around her body. She was hyperventilating, her chest heaving as the baby thrashed in distress inside her. "Ryan Mitchell has been skimming from my South Side hubs," Declan said softly, his deep voice vibrating through the room. He took a sip of whiskey. "My auditors brought it to my attention an hour ago. Tell me, Celeste, why was my senior forensic accountant being assaulted in the parking garage by a dead man walking?" Celeste swallowed. He knew I found the discrepancies. He wanted me to hide them. Declan finally turned. The raw, predatory intensity in his eyes made Celeste step backward. He set the glass on his mahogany desk, slowly reached inside his suit jacket, drew his customized Colt 1911, and placed it flat on the polished wood. The click of metal echoed like a gunshot. "I have men who will spend the next 3 days explaining to Ryan exactly why stealing from me was a mistake," Declan said as he walked slowly around the desk. "But you are a puzzle. Celeste, you are smart. You are cautious. You would never risk your life for a worm like Ryan, which means he had leverage over you." He stopped inches from her. Celeste had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. The scent of sandalwood, expensive tobacco, and concentrated danger surrounded her. "What leverage did he have?" Declan asked, his voice falling into a hypnotic and dangerous murmur. "Nothing." Celeste lied as a tear escaped and tracked down her pale cheek. "He had nothing." Declan's eyes darkened. His large, calloused hand rose and gently traced the line of her jaw. Celeste shivered violently. "You're shaking," he observed. His gaze moved over her. "You look exhausted. Your skin is pale. And you're wearing a thick wool coat indoors in 70-degree weather." Celeste squeezed her eyes shut. "Please. No. Please don't look." But Declan was no fool. He had survived by noticing the smallest and most carefully hidden details. His hand moved from her jaw, down over her collarbone, and stopped at the lapels of the heavy coat. With one swift, decisive movement, he pulled it open. Beneath it, Celeste wore a thin maternity blouse that clung to the undeniable, perfectly round, 6-month swell of her stomach. The silence that followed was absolute. Declan stared at her abdomen, frozen, for the first time since Celeste had met him. The Mafia boss looked completely and utterly shocked. His eyes moved back to her face, and then down again. His brilliant and ruthless mind performed the calculation in a fraction of a second. 6 months. The gala at the Drake. His breathing hitched. His mask of cold control shattered, replaced by something wild, possessive, and terrifyingly furious. "Tell me who the father is," the Mafia boss demanded, his voice a lethal, vibrating whisper that sucked the oxygen from the room. She had hidden the truth for 6 agonizing months, But time had run out. Celeste sobbed and brought her hands protectively over her belly. "Declan, please, say it," he commanded, closing the final inch between them. His hands gripped her shoulders, firm enough to trap her but not tight enough to hurt. His eyes burned with terrifying intensity. "Say it. Celeste, he's yours," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He's yours." The words hung between them, heavy and irrevocable. He's yours. For a man who had built an empire through anticipation, strategy, and cold calculation, Declan Gallagher looked entirely unmoored. His pale blue eyes searched Celeste's terrified face for a lie, a trick, or any trace of deceit. There was none. There was only the raw, trembling exhaustion of a woman who had carried a monumental secret completely alone. Slowly, as though approaching a frightened animal, Declan released her shoulders. His hands moved down the heavy wool of her coat, pushing the fabric aside until the full truth was visible. His large, scarred palms hovered for a fraction of a second before he placed them gently and almost reverently against the swell of her stomach. Celeste held her breath, her heart hammering like a trapped bird. At the exact moment his hands touched her, the baby, agitated by Celeste's adrenaline and elevated heartbeat, delivered a sharp, rolling kick beneath Declan's palm. Declan gasped. It was a sharp intake of breath that sounded almost painful. The ruthless syndicate leader, a man who had ordered the deaths of rivals without blinking, stumbled half a step backward and stared at his hand as though he had been struck by lightning. "A boy," Celeste whispered as fresh tears spilled from her eyes. The ultrasound technician said, "It's a boy." A terrifyingly beautiful darkness moved over Declan's face. His shock disappeared and was replaced by a possessiveness so intense that it seemed to change the pressure in the room. He looked at Celeste not simply as a woman he desired, but as the mother of his bloodline, carrying the next generation of his empire. Before he could speak, the penthouse doors opened. Tommy stepped inside with a grim expression. In his massive hands, he carried Celeste's rolling suitcase and a canvas duffel bag. Found these in the trunk of her Civic. "Boss," Tommy reported, setting the luggage on the floor with a heavy thud. There was also a printed boarding pass. One way to Seattle. The flight leaves in 3 hours. Declan's head snapped toward the luggage and then back to Celeste. The warmth that had blossomed in his eyes instantly froze into glacial fury. "Seattle," he repeated, the word dripping with quiet menace. "You were leaving. You were going to take my son across the country and disappear." "I had to," Celeste cried, her protective instincts overriding her fear. She wrapped both arms around her stomach and stepped away from him. "Look at what happened today. Declan, Ryan figured it out just by seeing me at the hospital. If he knew, other people would know. Do you have any idea what they would do to me? I'm not a mob wife. I'm a fat, invisible accountant. I would be leverage. I would be a target. And if you found out," she choked on a sob, "I thought you would take him from me. I thought you would lock me away or discard me because I don't fit into your world." "Discard you," Declan growled, crossing the space between them in 2 massive strides. He gripped her forearms, firmly but carefully enough not to bruise her. "You think I would throw away the woman who saved my life, the woman carrying my heir? You think I care about the superficial garbage of fitting in, Declan? Please, you are never leaving." Celeste, he stated, his voice a low and immovable, absolute. You are never getting on a plane without me. You are never hiding in the shadows again. Do you understand? The confrontation with Ryan. The terror of discovery. The surrender of her secret. And the crushing weight of the past 6 months finally overwhelmed Celeste's exhausted body. Black spots danced at the edges of her vision. The roaring in her ears became deafening. Her knees buckled. Celeste, Declan shouted as he caught her. He lifted her into his arms, easily supporting her full body and the added weight of the pregnancy. He carried her to the leather Chesterfield sofa, a bitter and poetic echo of the night they had met, and laid her down gently. Tommy Declan roared over his shoulder. Get Harrison here now. Tell him that if he isn't inside this penthouse in 10 minutes, I'll burn his clinic to the ground. Already on it. Tommy answered, his phone pressed against his ear. Declan knelt beside the sofa and frantically checked Celeste's pulse. She was pale and her breathing was shallow, but she remained conscious. She looked at him through glassy eyes. Ryan. She breathed, her mind still caught on the immediate danger. The books. The audit. Do not think about Ryan Mitchell, Declan said, his voice falling into a terrifyingly calm register. Ryan put his hands on you. He shoved the mother of my child against a concrete pillar in a cold garage. Celeste saw a flash of pure violence in his eyes. A promise of retribution. So absolute that it made her shiver. The hard karma Ryan had invoked by bullying the invisible fat woman in the office had manifested as his worst possible nightmare. He had not merely bullied an accountant. He had assaulted the queen of the Gallagher syndicate. Tommy, Declan said, without taking his eyes off Celeste's pale face. Yes. Boss, take Ryan to the warehouse at the docks. The soundproof one. Make certain he is awake when I arrive. He likes to steal. We'll see how well he steals when he doesn't have fingers. Celeste closed her eyes and turned her face into the leather cushions. She had tried to avoid the violence of Declan's world. She had tried to remain invisible. But the veil had been torn away. She now stood in the harsh light of the Mafia. And there was no going back when Celeste opened her eyes again. The ceiling was wrong. It was not the water-stained plaster of her Logan Square apartment or the sleek acoustic tile of the Gallagher corporate building. It was a soaring, vaulted ceiling decorated with hand-carved mahogany beams and a cascading crystal chandelier. She lay in a massive 4-poster bed beneath sheets so soft that they felt like liquid silk. The room smelled of lavender and sandalwood. Her blood pressure is returning to normal, but her heart rate remains elevated. A calm, clinical voice said from her left. Celeste turned her head. An older man with silver hair stood beside the bed, a stethoscope hanging from his neck. Next to him, arms crossed over his broad chest, stood Declan. He had removed his suit jacket. His white dress shirt was open at the collar, and his sleeves had been rolled up, exposing the dark syndicate tattoos winding across his forearms. He looked exhausted yet violently alert. Celeste. Declan stepped forward the instant. Her eyes met his. His hard face softened. He sat on the edge of the mattress, causing the bed to dip beneath his considerable weight. How do you feel? Like I was hit by a truck, she croaked. Her mouth felt full of cotton. Doctor. Harrison offered her a glass of ice water through a straw. You experienced a severe vasovagal syncope episode. Miss Higgins. Brought on by extreme stress, exhaustion, and the physical demands of your 3rd trimester. The baby is is perfectly fine. His heartbeat is strong and steady. But you, my dear, are dangerously close to preeclampsia. You need bed rest, hydration, and absolutely no stress. Thank you. Harrison, you can wait outside. Declan ordered without looking away from Celeste. The doctor wisely packed his bag and slipped through the heavy double doors, leaving them in a deep silence. Celeste took a slow sip of water and examined the palatial bedroom. Where am I? My home in Veneta Tower. Declan said, Your apartment is being packed by my team as we speak. Your lease has been terminated. You live here now. It was not a request. The gilded cage had closed its doors. Celeste felt the old flare of defensive anger she had cultivated during years of being marginalized. You can't just kidnap me. Declan, she said, struggling to sit upright. Her swollen stomach made the movement clumsy. Declan immediately placed a hand behind her back and helped her settle against the plush pillows. I am not kidnapping you. I am protecting you, he corrected softly. From the moment Tommy brought you upstairs, your life changed permanently. The men in my organization respect strength, but they search constantly for weakness. If anyone had discovered that you were carrying my child before I did, they would have used you to bleed me dry. Celeste looked down and twisted the edge of the silk blanket between her fingers. That is exactly why I didn't tell you. She swallowed the lump in her throat. That. And I know how men like you operate. I know the women you normally surround yourself with. They look like runway models. They are flawless. I am, she gestured vaguely toward her broad, soft body. I am fat. Declan. I've been fat my whole life. People look straight through me. I assumed that night at the Drake was only a trauma bond. A mistake. I thought that if I told you about the baby, you would take him and pay me to disappear, because I would embarrass you. Declan's jaw tightened so hard that a muscle moved near his ear. He leaned over her, bracing his arms on either side of her body. Look at me, he commanded. Celeste hesitated, and then raised her chin to meet his fierce blue gaze. The women you are talking about are decorations, Declan said, his voice rumbling low in his chest. They are status symbols. Nothing more. They shatter at the first sight of blood. But you. I was bleeding out on a sofa and you did not scream. You locked the door and put me back together. You are brilliant. You are strong. And as for your body, his palm moved over the heavy curve of her hip beneath the blanket and came to rest possessively against her waist. I have thought about the softness of your skin and the weight of your body every night for 6 months, he confessed, his voice roughening with restrained desire. You are exactly the woman I want. Do not insult the mother of my child by calling her an embarrassment again. You are a queen. Celeste, my queen. The sincerity in his eyes shattered the defensive walls Celeste had spent 32 years building. For the first time in her life, a man was not looking past her or settling for her. He looked at her as though she were the only woman on earth. A tear slipped down her cheek, and Declan caught it with his thumb. Now, Declan said, his tone shifting back toward business, although his hand continued to stroke her side gently. We have a problem to solve. Ryan Mitchell. Celeste shivered at the name. Did you kill him? Not yet. Declan answered coolly. He is being held at my docks. My auditors have been trying to untangle the damage in the South Side accounts, but they are terrified of making a mistake. They say the encryption is layered through dummy corporations. Celeste's professional mind engaged, pushing the fear aside. She was the senior forensic accountant. This was her domain. "They're looking at the wrong layer," she said, her voice gaining strength. Ryan was not smart enough to build new encryption. He piggybacked on the old bootlegging routes your grandfather used and filtered the money through an offshore shell company connected to the Maritime Shipping Union. Declan stared at her. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. He looked profoundly impressed. "You traced it back to the Union. I traced all of it," Celeste replied, a spark of defiance returning to her eyes. "Give me a laptop. I can isolate the missing funds and rebuild the ledger in 2 hours." Declan laughed, a deep and booming sound that echoed through the enormous bedroom. It was a sound of pure triumph. He leaned forward and pressed a hard kiss to her forehead. "You," he murmured against her skin, "are the most dangerous thing in my empire." Within 10 minutes, a top-of-the-line encrypted laptop sat on a velvet breakfast tray across Celeste's lap, propped against the pillows and wearing one of Declan's oversized black silk shirts over her pregnant stomach. Celeste began to work. Her fingers flew over the keys as her mind navigated the complex financial labyrinth of the Gallagher syndicate. Declan sat in an armchair near the window with a glass of whiskey and watched her. He observed the concentrated furrow of her brow. He watched the capable and intelligent woman who had hidden in plain sight, who had almost outmaneuvered him, systematically dismantle the man who had threatened her. 2 hours later, Celeste struck the enter key with a satisfying click. "Done," she announced, leaning back with a tired sigh. "The funds are isolated. The ledger is clean. Ryan's digital footprint is completely exposed." Declan rose and approached the bed. He studied the screen and then looked at Celeste. The pride in his eyes was undeniable. "Thank you. Ma'ana muwasal," he said softly. He closed the computer and set it aside. "Sleep. You and our son need to rest." "Where are you going?" Celeste asked, her heart fluttering as he strapped a leather shoulder holster across his chest. Declan's eyes became dead and cold as the syndicate boss returned in full force. "Ryan Mitchell believed he could threaten what is mine," he said, his voice carrying the chilling finality of a judge handing down a sentence. "I am going to the docks. It is time to show him what happens when karma strikes back." The Southside docks were a desolate stretch of rusted shipping containers, cracked concrete, and freezing water sloshing against old pylons. In the dead of night, the entire area was swallowed by thick fog rolling off Lake Michigan. Warehouse 4 stood at the edge of the pier. From the outside, it looked like a decaying relic of Chicago's industrial past. Inside, it was a soundproofed and meticulously clean interrogation chamber where Gallagher secrets remained buried. The air carried the metallic scent of fear beneath the harsh glare of industrial halogen lights. A heavy iron chair had been bolted to the center of the vast concrete floor. Ryan Mitchell was strapped to it. His expensive. The shiny suit had been torn at the shoulders and stained with sweat and grime. His face was bruised from Tommy's intervention in the parking garage, and his breaths came in short. Panicked gasps. He had been sitting in the freezing warehouse for 3 hours, surrounded by 4 of Declan Gallagher's most frightening enforcers. None of them had spoken to him. They stood in the shadows like gargoyles and waited. The silence became its own psychological torture. Ryan's mind raced as he tried to calculate his odds. He was arrogant, but he was not entirely stupid. He knew he had been caught stealing and understood the hierarchy of the syndicate. Mid-level managers who skimmed money were normally beaten nearly to death, stripped of their assets, and exiled. He could survive that. He only needed to grovel, return the money, and blame everything on an accounting error. He would blame Celeste. That was the play. He would tell Declan that the fat, incompetent bookkeeper had mishandled the ledgers and tried to frame him. The steel door at the far end of the warehouse groaned open. The heavy, rhythmic footsteps of leather dress shoes echoed across the concrete walls. The enforcers immediately straightened and stepped deeper into the shadows, clearing a path. Declan Gallagher entered the harsh circle of halogen light. He had changed out of his suit and now wore a black cashmere turtleneck and dark slacks. Looking every inch the apex predator of the Chicago underworld, his face was an emotionless mask carved from granite. In his right hand, he carried a thick manila folder. Mr. Gallagher. Declan, please. You have to listen to me. Ryan screamed as he strained against the thick ties securing his wrists to the armrests. It's a misunderstanding. I can explain everything. The numbers. Declan did not answer. He walked forward until he stood only inches from Ryan and tossed the folder into his lap. The pages spilled out. Printed copies of the exact ledger Celeste had rebuilt from the penthouse bed only hours earlier. The offshore shell company, connected to the Maritime Shipping Union. Declan said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to resonate inside Ryan's bones. 4 months. $214,000. Neatly itemized and scrubbed of your digital footprint. Or so you believed. Ryan stared at the papers as the blood drained from his face. His prepared lie died in his throat. How did you find it? My senior forensic accountant found it. Declan replied, his pale blue eyes locking onto Ryan's terrified gaze. She isolated the missing funds and rebuilt the ledger in less than 2 hours. She is exceptionally brilliant. Ryan's desperation surged and overwhelmed his remaining judgment. Celeste, boss. You have to believe me. She's setting me up. She is a crazy, lonely woman. I caught her trying to sneak out of the building. She is pregnant. For God's sake. She was probably trying to steal the money so she could run away and take care of whatever bastard she's carrying. The temperature in the warehouse seemed to drop 30 degrees. The 4 enforcers physically recoiled and stepped away from their boss. Declan slowly leaned down, placing one hand on each iron armrest and trapping Ryan inside his terrifying orbit. Let me tell you exactly what you did today. Ryan, Declan whispered, the softness of his voice more frightening than a scream. You cornered my senior accountant. You threatened to expose a private medical condition in order to destroy her career. When she refused to become an accomplice to your theft, you put your hands on her. You shoved her against a concrete pillar. I was angry. Ryan stammered, openly sobbing. I didn't hurt her. You shoved a pregnant woman. Declan continued, his voice falling into a demonic register. A woman carrying a child. Did you know she was 6 months along? Did you know she was exhausted, suffering from hypertension, and terrified? She's just a bookkeeper. Ryan cried, completely failing to understand the magnitude of his mistake. She's nobody. Declan's hand shot forward, his massive fingers wrapped around Ryan's throat with the speed of a striking viper. He did not squeeze hard enough to crush the windpipe, only enough to restrict Ryan's air and force his chin upward until their eyes met. She is the mother of my son. Declan snarled. the truth detonating, inside the silent warehouse. Ryan's eyes widened to impossible proportions. The realization struck him with the force of a freight train. He had not merely bullied an invisible, overweight office worker. He had blackmailed, threatened, and physically assaulted the woman carrying the heir to the Gallagher syndicate. He had touched the boss's queen. "Please," Ryan choked, tears streaming down his bruised face. "I didn't know. Boss, I swear to God, I didn't know. Ignorance does not grant you amnesty," Declan said coldly as he released Ryan's throat. He removed a pristine white handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his hand while looking at the weeping man with utter disgust. "You believed she was weak because of how she looked. You saw her soft body and quiet demeanor, and you decided she was a victim. You saw someone you could crush without consequence. You failed to understand that she possesses more strength in one finger than you have in your entire miserable existence. She survived me. She survived the shadows. And she systematically dismantled your pathetic operation from my bed." Declan moved to the edge of the light and looked at Tommy, who stood beside a heavy metal workbench covered with tools. "I told Celeste that you liked to steal," Declan said, his voice echoing through the open space. "I told her we would discover how well you could steal without your fingers. But she has a soft heart. She dislikes unnecessary bloodshed." A flicker of desperate hope appeared in Ryan's eyes. "Thank you. Thank her. Please." "Therefore," Declan continued, ignoring the interruption, "I will compromise. Tommy." "Yes, boss." Tommy stepped forward and lifted a heavy steel-headed sledgehammer from the workbench. "Mr. Mitchell is permanently relieved of his position at Gallagher Logistics. He is also permanently relieved of his ability to type on a keyboard or hold a pen," Declan ordered, his face a mask of absolute cruelty. "Shatter every bone in both hands. Then put him aboard a freighter bound for Jakarta. If he ever steps on American soil again, I will not be so merciful." Ryan screamed and thrashed against the restraints as Tommy approached. Declan did not remain to watch. He turned and walked out through the heavy steel doors. The screams of the man who had dared to touch his family were abruptly cut off when the soundproof door sealed behind him. The karma was complete. The scales were balanced. Now he had a queen to return to. Summer faded into a sweltering Chicago autumn. The leaves in the wealthy northern suburbs changed to brilliant shades of gold and crimson. But Celeste barely noticed the shifting seasons. Her entire world had been irrevocably transformed. She did not return to the glass and steel corporate tower in River North. Instead, she ruled the financial side of the Gallagher syndicate from a sprawling, fortified estate in Winnetka. The transition was not easy. Celeste had spent 32 years making herself small, hiding her intellect and her body beneath oversized cardigans and a quiet demeanor. Now she had been thrust into the blinding spotlight of the underworld. At first, the men in Declan's inner circle did not know what to make of her. They were accustomed to mob wives who spent their days inside luxury spas or shopping along the Magnificent Mile. Women who looked in another direction whenever blood money arrived. Celeste was different. She was a heavy-set, fiercely intelligent forensic accountant who wore flowing maternity dresses and sat at the head of a mahogany dining table while relentlessly auditing the syndicate's ledgers. Any doubts about her fitness for the position were quickly destroyed. 3 weeks after moving into the estate, Celeste uncovered a massive leak in the organization's Montreal pharmaceutical operation, saving millions of dollars and securing the loyalty of every capo in the room. They no longer saw a fat woman. They saw a financial genius who protected their livelihoods. They began calling her the boss's mind. Tommy practically worshipped the ground she walked on and followed her through the estate like a giant personal shadow. The most profound transformation, however, occurred in her relationship with Declan. He treated her with a reverence that bordered on religious devotion. He stripped away her insecurities with the same meticulous attention he used to dismantle his enemies. Every night, away from the eyes of his soldiers, the ruthless syndicate leader knelt before her in their palatial bedroom, pressed kisses against her swollen belly, and murmured softly to their unborn son. He made Celeste feel beautiful, powerful, and utterly invincible. By the 3rd week of October, Celeste was 39 weeks pregnant and profoundly uncomfortable. Her back ached constantly, and her ankles had swollen to twice their normal size. It was a rainy Tuesday evening. Declan was hosting a private meeting with 2 rival capos from the New York families in the first-floor library. Celeste was upstairs in the master suite, reviewing quarterly projections on her laptop. When the first contraction hit, it was not a dull ache. It was a vicious, sharp twist through her abdomen that stole her breath and made her drop the laptop onto the duvet. "Okay," Celeste gasped, clutching her stomach. "Just Braxton Hicks. Breathe." 10 minutes later, a second contraction struck, harder than the first. At the same moment, she felt a sudden warm rush soak through her silk nightgown. Her water had broken. Celeste reached toward the intercom on the nightstand with a shaking hand and pressed the button connected to the library. Downstairs, the atmosphere was tense. Declan stared across the table at the New York capos, his voice cold and commanding while they negotiated territory lines for the coming year. Tommy and 2 enforcers guarded the heavy oak doors. The intercom on the desk buzzed with a sharp and intrusive sound. Declan frowned without taking his eyes off the rival boss and pressed the receiver. "Yes, Declan." Celeste's voice crackled through the speaker. She sounded breathless, with a tight edge of pain in her tone. "I think you need to conclude your meeting now." The New York capos bristled at the interruption, but Declan's reaction was instantaneous. The cold, calculating, syndicate boss disappeared. The blood drained from his face. He slammed both hands onto the desk and rose so violently that his leather chair toppled backward. "The meeting is over," Declan barked as he sprinted toward the door. "Get out of my house." He did not wait for a response. He threw open the library doors. "Tommy, call Harrison. Tell him we are going to the clinic now. Bring the armored vehicle to the front entrance." Declan took the grand staircase, 2 steps at a time, his heart pounding with pure terror. He had faced loaded guns, rival assassin, and federal indictments without flinching. But the sound of Celeste in pain stripped away every defense he possessed. He burst into the master suite and found her standing beside the bed, gripping one of the heavy mahogany posts. Her face was pale and contorted as another contraction tore through her. "I've got you," Declan said, his voice miraculously steady despite the panic roaring in his ears. He lifted her into his arms. "I've got you. My love, you are doing perfectly." The following 10 hours became a blur of clinical lights, cries of pain, and agonizing fear. Dr. Harrison's underground maternity clinic was a fortress of medical technology. But money and power meant nothing in the chaos of childbirth. Celeste labored intensely. Her soft, heavy body proved to be a powerhouse of resilience. Through everything, Declan remained at her side. He held her hand, whispered fierce promises into her ear, wiped the sweat from her forehead, and anchored her to reality whenever the pain threatened to pull her under. Shortly before dawn, the furious cry of a newborn shattered the sterile silence of the delivery room. Celeste collapsed against the pillows, her chest heaving and tears streaming down her face. She was completely exhausted, her hair plastered against her head, but she had never felt more triumphant. "A boy, Doctor," Harrison announced with a warm smile as he cleaned the wriggling infant and wrapped him in a warm blanket. "A perfectly healthy, strong baby boy. Congratulations, Mr. Gallagher and Ms. Higgins." Declan stood frozen, his massive chest rising and falling heavily. He looked at the screaming bundle in the doctor's arms, and then at Celeste, the ruthless Mafia boss. The King of Chicago dropped to his knees beside the birthing bed. He buried his face against Celeste's neck, and, for the first time in his adult life, Declan Gallagher wept. They were tears of relief, overwhelming love, and profound gratitude. "Doctor," Harrison gently placed the baby on Celeste's chest. The infant immediately quieted against the warmth of his mother's skin. His tiny fists moved through the air and then settled against her. Celeste looked down at her son. He had a shock of dark hair and, even entirely new to the world, he seemed to possess Declan's strong jaw. Declan's large hand came to rest over hers, gently encompassing their child's tiny body. "Liam," Celeste whispered as she looked at Declan. "Liam Gallagher." Declan kissed her forehead and then pressed another kiss against the top of his son's head. Liam, the heir to the empire. 3 months later, the Winter Gala returned to the Drake Hotel. This time, Celeste did not hide inside the dark archival library. She entered the grand ballroom on Declan Gallagher's arm. She wore a custom emerald green gown that proudly displayed her full figure and the lingering softness of her postpartum body. The room became completely silent when they appeared. The elites of the underworld, the politicians, and the socialites all stopped to look at the king and his queen. There were no whispers about her size. There was only awe and respect. She was the woman who had saved the boss's life, the financial mastermind who had transformed the organization's profits, and the mother of the next generation. Declan guided her into the center of the ballroom. He did not care about the music or the staring crowd. He wrapped one arm around her waist and drew her against his chest. He looked at her with burning, possessive pride. "You used to be invisible," Declan murmured against her ear, his hand resting against the soft curve of her hip. "Look around, Celeste. They can all see you now." Celeste smiled and rested her head against his shoulder. She did not need to hide anymore. The hard karma of her past had burned away the shadows and left her exactly where she was meant to be, ruling an empire, loved fiercely, and never invisible again.